A Brian Rothery Podcast. Revelation. A glimpse into another world. Brian Rothery is a retired writer and journalist.
Revelation, a glimpse into another world. I'd like to explain to you why you may find my presentation somewhat hesitant. The reason is that I am 86 years of age and I lost my sight last year. This means that as a former writer-journalist, I'm no longer able to use the well-tried and trusted method of a properly prepared script, because I can't read any script either from paper or from a computer screen. So I'm barely on my memory. Having said this, I hope that you're going to find what I have to say not just interesting, but in fact quite extraordinary. Because it's about the adventure that some of us have on very rare occasions of either seeing into or visiting another world. Now, what do I mean by another world? Well, in the first instance, I mean that the world is not the world that we appear to live on the surface of planet Earth. That state of being, which is a battleground between chaos and order, and good and evil. Now, there's plenty of room in the universe as we know it, and as we don't know it, for other worlds, because some physicists tell us that in fact, we can only see and measure 10% of the universe. That they know that there is something going on in the other 90%, but they can neither access it nor measure it. So if the part of the universe that we actually perceive, what we might call apparent reality, if that's only 10% and contains billions of other planets and stars, not that any of them are any use to us because they're all light years away. But if that is the case, how much more space there must be for worlds or for states of being in the 90% of the universe that we know is there, but that we cannot access. Now, I have 4 sources for the information I'm about to share with you. And these 4 sources are, in the first instance, a vision I had myself over 35 years ago. The second source is somewhat unsatisfactory because I don't know when I heard it or where I heard it, and I'm not even sure if that I actually heard it and didn't just dream it. And it is that one of the poets and writers of the American Beat Generation, one of the writers such as Jack Kerouac or one of his colleagues, had an experience under the influence of drugs, and they described that experience afterwards as having experienced the connectedness of the universe. This resonated very strongly with me because in the first instance it was the only, at the time, corroboration I had that anybody else had had an experience such as my own. And in the second instance, the connectedness of the universe, those 5 words, greatly represented what I had experienced as one aspect, one important attribute of my own vision. Now, the third source is the Canadian professor, the psychiatrist, philosopher, historian, Jordan Peterson, who's both an internet sensation and a worldwide best-selling author who has hundreds of millions of viewers. In his work as a psychiatrist, Jordan Peterson has found a few patients who had had profound spiritual visions that had affected them deeply and changed their lives forever. But by far the most authoritative source I have is my last source, which is none other than the great psychiatrist Carl Jung, who was a disciple of Sigmund Freud's and worked with Sigmund Freud until he broke from him and went his own way. In 1944, Jung had a heart attack, and during the heart attack he had a near-death experience. During the initial part of the heart attack, when he was having his near-death experience, he experienced an extraordinary vision. And in the 3 weeks that followed in hospital, under the influence both of drugs and oxygen, he had a series of vivid visions, all of which he describes very clearly in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, in chapter 10, in the chapter called Vision. Now, before I proceed to try to describe the actual visions which he had and I had, I have to say why it is so difficult, why it will be so difficult for me to describe them. The reason is that I believe that at the point where a vision begins, that a curtain is pulled back between this other world and our world. And this new world that is revealed to us under the influence either of drugs or in a near-death experience, or whatever other reason has caused the vision, such as perhaps a great personal catastrophe of some kind, or an attempted suicide. This world that is revealed to us is one which can only be described as brilliant in all of its aspects. In other words, every single attribute of it is experienced with a heightened intensity. Now, were we to contemplate this world, or try to measure this world with our planet Earth faculties, it would be like trying to measure the sun by looking at the sun with naked, unprotected eyes. Not only would we not measure the sun, but we would be blinded. So at the same time that the curtain is pulled back, revealing this world to us, within each of us there is activated a hitherto inactive or locked away faculty, which is a faculty equal to, if not greater than, all our other faculties of sight and sound and feeling. And this faculty gives us a kind of super consciousness or a super cognitive ability. And not just a super cognitive ability, but also a super level of awareness, a greatly raised or greatly expanded level of awareness, which allows us to appreciate what it is we are going to experience in the dream or in the vision. Now, the problem with this is that, while this is wonderful during the vision itself, that when the vision ends and the curtain is pulled back, this faculty is deactivated and we are back into our planet Earth state of time and gravity with our planet Earth faculties, and these are completely inadequate in any attempt to describe what it was that we had seen or experienced in the vision. Now I will move to the visions themselves, beginning with Jung's and ending with my own. So as I said earlier, Jung had his heart attack in 1944, and during the heart attack he had his first near-death experience and also his first dramatic vision. Now the vision was as follows. He found himself floating in space above planet Earth, in fact in orbit, around the country that at the time was called Ceylon. In other words, he was facing India. And on the left-hand side of the part of the globe that he could see, on the extreme left-hand, lower left-hand corner, he could see the sands of Arabia. And on the top left-hand corner, he could see the corner of Europe in the form of a slice of the Mediterranean around Greece. On his extreme right, under clouds, he could see the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas. He later checked with experts and he asked, how far would I have had to be out in space to see this slice of the Earth? And he was told we would have to be 1,000 miles out in orbit. He then describes the Earth as it looked to him at the time, and he describes it as being of a most beautiful blue colour. And not only blue, a glorious blue, but that the outlines of things like continents and beaches and so on far below the blue shone through the blue like silver threads. In other words, he gave a very accurate account of what the Earth would look like later when the astronauts and cosmonauts circled it. The first human to circle the Earth was Yuri Gagarin, and he did that in April 1961. And Young died in June 61. So Young had this experience in 1944 and wrote of it sometime after that. I don't know exactly when, but that's something that's very easily checked. He then turned around and looked behind him into the Indian Ocean, and he saw floating behind him, also in orbit, he saw a granite temple with its doors open and lighted candles inside and a couple of steps leading into it. And he realised that he had to go into it, and that when he went into it, that he would meet wise people who would give him all the answers that he still needed about the meaning of life. So he began to move towards the temple. Just before he reached the entrance, his doctor floated up from Europe behind him, urgently saying to him that he has to stop, that he can't go in, that he has to go back. And he was very disappointed to hear this, because he wanted to go into the temple to get these answers. And he was even angry with the doctor for the interruption, and at that point the vision ended. Now, in the 3 weeks that followed, in which he probably hovered between life and death, on both drugs and on oxygen, he had a fairly unhappy day each day, kind of miserable. And each evening he would sleep up to midnight, and every midnight he would waken up and have a most vivid and dramatic dream or vision. Now, the fascinating thing about this is that in the rest of the book, apart from this chapter, Young has accounts and recounts dozens and dozens of dreams, which he not only remembers, which is a complete mystery to people like myself who, when they wake up in the morning, after a few seconds, have forgotten the dream. But he remembered his dreams and described them in great detail. And of course, being a former student of Freud's, who wrote The Interpretation of Dreams, Jung interprets each of these dreams in great detail. But in the dreams that now follow in this chapter, he makes no attempt to interpret them, and there's no need to, because each dream is complete in itself. Now, in all cases, these visions were brilliant and beautiful beyond description and beyond words. In fact, he says indescribable. He even uses expressions such as that he felt eternal bliss. In one vision, he actually says, very strange for a psychiatrist, he says, angels were present, which is beautiful. He also saw himself in his former life, saw himself in a boxed shape. This is interesting for what I'm going to say in a few moments about my own experience. And in a very reduced state. And not only did he see himself in a box, like in a box hanging in space, he saw the whole of life on planet Earth as being a three-dimensional place in a box state, which most importantly was a mere segment of something which was much more whole and in much more unity. So we saw the whole of life on Earth, on planet Earth, as being a reduced, inadequate state. Now, during the visions, he had several scenes from both mythical and biblical history, including 2 weddings of a biblical nature. And in each of the weddings, he was not a bridegroom or a guest. He was the wedding itself. In other words, he was part of the vision. Now, the most important thing that he says, from my point of view of all, was that the dream, not planet Earth, life on planet Earth that he would have to go back to, but that the vision was real. That was the reality. Not the life, not the reduced life and reduced place that he would be going back to on planet Earth. I now move to my own experience. Now, the reason I was so taken with the 5 words from the the poet or writer of the American Beat generation, was that my first impression was of the connectedness of all things. And I actually also saw the boxes that Jung described, and I'm going to try with great difficulty now to describe how I saw them. There is a kind of ornament that you can buy in certain European countries, such as Germany, that hangs on the wall of a living room or on a child's bedroom. And it's like a ornate wooden bookcase, except it doesn't hold books. It has boxed spaces, and inside each boxed space there's a beautiful object, such as an ornament or a figurine. And the boxed spaces are related to each other, and they're also related to the whole, into which they are integrated. Now, I can't say how many of these boxed concepts there were in my own experience. I know that there were at least 4, and there were perhaps as many as 6, but I can't even say what they were. And nor can I say that, like Jung, that mine related to my life back on planet Earth. Now, the second extremely striking aspect or attribute of my vision was that it was so familiar. I had actually experienced it before in some kind of antecedents, or perhaps Jung would say in my group, my part of the mass or group unconscious, or as he might also say, in the great reservoir of archetypal experience that goes back to perhaps before the Ice Ages, to whatever point that awareness entered into humankind's consciousness or awareness. It was so familiar that I actually found myself laughing with childish joy at how I could have forgotten it. It was not only familiar, it was so obvious, and it explained everything. The third aspect was the total unity and the total integration of everything, and the fact that I was not an observer. I was part of it. I was bathing in it. Like Jung, being the weddings, I was part of what I was seeing. And then the most important aspect of all, which is going to give me the greatest difficulty, is that I was actually contemplating or aware of some profound truth, some great happening, which was also an obvious one, and one that filled me with childish joy. Now, I think a great test of my honesty would be to say, okay, I'm 86, I've lost my sight, I'm actually making this little podcast during the corona pandemic, so I certainly probably don't have very much time left on this planet Earth. So, do I want to go to this beautiful place when I die? I think that's a very fair question. And the answer, interestingly, is no, I don't. And the reason is not simply because unless I have my faculty reactivated, which gives me which supercharges my consciousness, that I'll be blinded by it. The reason is that I want something else, much less than this, which I'm going to tell you about. But the very fact that I've had the experience of the vision gives me the confidence and the faith and the hope that in any universe where I have had such a beautiful vision, in any such universe, my own hopes are not wildly optimistic. And this is what I want. When I met her, my beloved was a 16-year-old girl, and I was a 17-year-old boy, and we spent 61 years together in a loving relationship, in which we became parents and grandparents. And she died 8 years ago, and I have mourned her for 8 years, so I have actually loved her for 69 years. When I die, the vision I've had, and the visions of Jung and others, gives me the hope that I'm going to be able to ask that I have one more lifetime with her, that I have the opportunity again to live with her exactly as she was, no better and no worse, in whatever place and in whatever state that may be. And if the angel I am negotiating this with says to me, this is all very well, and we will give you this one more life with her, but you can't go on having a life the same life over and over again with the same woman. You're going to have to move on. So you're going to have to prepare yourself and tell me where it is you want to move to when you have this next life. I will then say, okay, if I have to move on, I would like my male animus to merge with her feminine anima, which should not be too difficult, seeing that for the 61 years that we were together, my whole being resided within her wonderfully generous and loving femininity, or feminine anima. Because if we did merge such, then we would I certainly would be qualified, and we certainly would be qualified to go back into that garden of love and beauty, which was that vision that I experienced over 35 years ago.